The marketplace buzzed with noise, a chaotic blend of alien tongues, bartering voices, and the hum of ships coming and going. The planet Arathis, located in the lawless outer colonies, was a melting pot of species, technology, and moral ambiguity. Here, human laws and ethics held no sway. Instead, the powerful and the wealthy ruled, while the less fortunate were swallowed whole by a system that treated sentient beings like currency. Drace had never wanted to visit this wretched place, but fate had a cruel sense of humor. Drace Veron stood on the edge of a crowded slave auction, his jaw clenched, watching the grotesque spectacle unfold before him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he bore the look of a man who had seen too much in too little time. His dark hair was streaked with the stress of too many close calls in too many parts of the galaxy, and his deep green eyes were hard with the knowledge that he was running out of options. He had come to Arathis to settle a debt, a deal gone wrong, that could ruin him if left unresolved. But he had never imagined it would come to this. Buying a slave was the last thing he wanted, yet there he stood, trapped by circumstance. A shady merchant had presented him with a choice: walk away empty-handed, forfeiting what little was left of his business, or take this rare treasure and settle the score. The merchant's voice cut through the din of the crowd. She's Illyrian, one of the last of her kind available on this market. A species known for their unique abilities. Drace's gaze followed the merchant's greasy finger toward the stage, and that's when he saw her. She stood tall, even in chains, her head held high as though refusing to be broken despite the circumstances. Her skin was unlike anything Drace had ever seen, a striking shade of deep violet, shimmering faintly under the dim lights like the surface of a twilight ocean. Her eyes were large and glowing, a bright amethyst hue that seemed to see through the crowd, through the shackles, through everything. She was beautiful, alien in the most literal sense of the word, but it wasn't her appearance that captured Drace's attention. It was the way she stood there, proud, untouched by the filth around her, even though she was bound and presented as a commodity. Her name is Oriala, the merchant added with a sly grin. She's telepathic, like most of her kind. But they say Illyrians have other gifts too. Some masters claim that with the right bond, an Illyrian can do extraordinary things. Drace's stomach twisted. He hated the merchant's oily insinuation, the implication that this woman could be molded into whatever dark desires her owner had in mind. But it wasn't just the merchant's words that unsettled him, it was the fact that Oriala was looking directly at him now, her piercing gaze unwavering. Something in her eyes made his breath catch, not fear, not anger, something deeper. She was studying him, as though weighing him in her mind. Her expression betrayed nothing, but her gaze seemed to ask a silent question: what kind of man are you? The moment stretched on too long, but before Drace could decide whether to turn away or speak, the merchant pushed harder. She's yours for a price, Veron. Take her and the debt between us is cleared. Drace knew he had no choice. If he walked away, his reputation and his entire livelihood would be destroyed. But the idea of purchasing another being, of owning someone, made his skin crawl. He had no desire to become part of the system that preyed on the weak and desperate. Still, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The merchant smirked, as if sensing Drace's internal conflict, and thrust the datapad forward. Sign here, and she's yours. Drace hesitated, looking one last time at Oriala. Her eyes were still locked on his, unblinking, as though she could see every thought racing through his mind. He knew in that moment that whatever he decided, it would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. With a reluctant sigh, he pressed his thumb to the datapad, sealing the deal. The merchant cackled with satisfaction and began barking orders to his assistants to unshackle Oriala. Drace watched as the chains around her wrists and ankles were removed, and for a brief moment he thought she might flee, run into the crowd and disappear. But she didn't move. Instead, she walked toward him with a measured grace, her violet skin catching the light as she moved. When she stopped in front of him, she spoke for the first time, her voice smooth but laced with an edge of bitterness. So I belong to you now. Drace flinched at her words, feeling the weight of them settle heavily on his shoulders. I don't want to own anyone, he replied, his voice low, tense. I had no choice. Oriala raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. There is always a choice, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. You just didn't like any of the others. Her words cut deeper than he expected. She was right, of course, but admitting that out loud felt like giving in to a darkness he wasn't ready to face. Instead, he gestured toward his ship, the Silent Ember, docked just outside the bazaar. "Come on," he muttered. "We need to get out of here." She didn't argue or protest, but Drace could feel her sharp gaze on his back as they made their way through the crowded streets. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was studying him, trying to decide whether he was just like every other man who had tried to claim her before. As they boarded the Silent Ember, the tension between them thickened. Drace led Oriella to the quarters he had hastily prepared for her, small but clean, with a cot and a few basic amenities. It wasn't much, but it was far better than the conditions he had seen slaves endure in the past. She stood in the center of the room, surveying her surroundings in silence. Drace cleared his throat, feeling the awkwardness settle in. "I'll give you your space," he said, stepping toward the door. "I'm not. I won't ask anything of you. You're free to." Free? Oriella's voice cut through the air, sharp and filled with irony. "I don't think you understand what that word means, human." Drace turned to face her, guilt rising in his chest. "I know this isn't freedom," he said quietly, "but I'm not like the others who've owned you before." She crossed her arms, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. "You think your kindness changes anything? You signed the contract. You paid for me. I am yours, whether you like it or not." Drace didn't know how to respond. The truth was, he hated himself for the position he was in, but there was no way to change it now. He had bought her, and that meant he was responsible for her. But the last thing he wanted was to treat her like property. "I don't want this either," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But we're in this situation now, and I promise you I won't force you into anything. You can stay here as long as you need." Oriella's gaze softened for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it with indifference. Promises mean little when they come from those in power. Drace didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right, after all. In the eyes of the universe, he was her owner now. But as he left her quarters and retreated to the cockpit, he couldn't help but feel that he had just taken the first step into something far more dangerous and far more intimate than he had ever anticipated. In the quiet solitude of the ship, Oriella sat on the edge of the cot, her thoughts swirling. She had been sold many times before, passed from one master to another, each more cruel than the last. But this human, Drace, there was something different about him. She could sense it in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, not with lust or dominance, but with something more conflicted, something that made her curiosity flare against her better judgment. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, brushing lightly against the edges of his thoughts. She didn't delve deep, just a soft touch, enough to feel the storm of emotions roiling beneath his calm exterior. Guilt, regret, and something else. Something unfamiliar to her, a desire not for power, but for understanding. Oriella withdrew her mind before he could sense her presence. She would not bond with him. Not yet. But something told her that this human might be different from the others. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could offer her something she had long given up, hoping for, freedom not of body, but of spirit. And that thought, as dangerous as it was, sent a thrill of both fear and longing through her heart. The Silent Ember sailed silently through the black void of space, leaving the chaos of Arathis and its filthy marketplace far behind. But inside the ship, tension crackled in the air, like a living thing. Two beings, strangers to one another, sat at opposite ends of this vessel, connected by a fate neither wanted but could not escape. Drace Varon paced the narrow confines of the cockpit, his mind as restless as his movements. The stars stretched out before him, indifferent to the turmoil that twisted inside him. He had bought her Oriella. The word bought made him feel sick every time it crossed his mind, as if he had committed some unspeakable crime. But no matter how much he replayed the events in his head, it all came back to the same conclusion: he had no choice. It was her or his ruin. His eyes flicked to the ship's console, but he wasn't really seeing it. Instead, he saw her. Standing there, proud, defiant, with violet skin shimmering like the dark waters of a distant, alien sea. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him, as if daring him to prove he was different from the others who had owned her before. But was he? Drace's throat tightened. He wanted to believe he wasn't like those men, but the reality was hard to swallow. He had bought another being, regardless of his intentions. And now what? What could he possibly offer her beyond empty words about how he didn't want to own her? He stopped pacing and sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. No use avoiding it any longer. He needed to talk to her, to make sure she understood where he stood, where they stood. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to navigate this situation without hostility. With a steadying breath, Drace left the cockpit and made his way to the quarters where Oriala had been resting since they'd left the planet. The narrow hallway felt oppressive, as if the ship itself sensed the weight of what was happening between them. When he reached the door, he hesitated. The thin barrier separated him from the woman who only hours before had been chained in a market, sold as if she were nothing more than property. His heart thudded in his chest. He didn't know what to say, how to make this right, but he had to try. He tapped the door panel softly. Oriala, he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can I come in?" A long pause followed. Then her voice, smooth but sharp as glass, floated through the door. "You don't need my permission, do you?" Drace winced. The truth of her words stung more than he wanted to admit. Still, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Oriala was sitting on the edge of the small cot, her posture impossibly composed despite the confines of the room. Her violet skin, luminous and otherworldly, seemed to drink in the dim light of the ship, casting her in a soft, ethereal glow. But her eyes, those glowing amethyst eyes, were hard and unreadable, fixed on him with an intensity that made Drace's breath catch. "You wanted to talk?" she asked, her voice neutral but with an edge that made it clear she wasn't interested in pleasantries. Drace nodded, stepping further into the room but careful not to crowd her. I wanted to check on you," he began, though he knew how hollow that sounded. "I wanted to see if you were settling in." Oriala's expression didn't change, but the slight tilt of her head told him she found his words amusing in the most bitter of ways. "Settling in," she repeated, her voice laced with quiet irony. "Is that what you call this?" Drace rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I know it's not." "Ideal," he said, feeling clumsy in his attempts to make this conversation anything other than terrible. "But I meant what I said. I don't intend to keep you as a slave." Oriala's lips twitched into a mirthless smile, though her eyes remained cold. "And yet here I am, bought and paid for. A lovely sentiment, but it doesn't change the reality, does it?" Her words landed like a blow, but Drace forced himself not to flinch. He couldn't deny the truth of her statement. She had every right to distrust him, every right to be angry. But he had to make her see that he wasn't like the others. "No," he admitted, his voice low. "It doesn't. But that doesn't mean I don't want to make this right. I didn't want to buy you." I had no choice. He could hear the frustration creeping into his tone, and he took a breath to steady himself. "The situation is complicated." Oriala's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained silent, watching him with that same unnerving focus. Drace shifted, unsure whether he was getting through to her or just digging himself deeper. "I know you don't trust me," he continued, his voice softer now. "I wouldn't either, if I were in your position. But I'm not like them, Oriala. I don't want to own you. I don't want to be a slave owner," she finished for him, her tone sharper now. "I've heard it before, Drace. Men who think they're different, men who think they're better than the others because they treat me with a little more kindness, a little more respect. But at the end of the day, they still signed the contract. They still own me." The words were like a dagger in his chest, but Drace knew she was right. He had signed the contract. He had bought her. He had played into the very system he despised. But how could he explain to her that he hadn't had a choice? That he would have lost everything if he hadn't? "You're right," Drace said quietly, his voice filled with the weight of his guilt. "I signed the contract. I bought you. And for that, I'm sorry." Oriala's eyes flickered at his words, but she didn't soften. Instead, she rose from the cot, moving with a grace that seemed almost unreal, like liquid mercury in motion. She stepped closer to him, and Drace's pulse quickened not out of fear, but out of the sheer intensity of her presence. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. "Sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now, though the edge of it still cut through the air between them. "What will your apology change, Drace? Will it undo what has been done? Will it unbind me from you?" Drace's throat tightened. He had no answer to that. No words that could make up for what she had endured, no promise that could erase the past. "I can't undo it," he admitted, his voice rough with frustration. "But I can try to make it right. I'm not going to keep you here against your will." Oriala raised an eyebrow, a cold smile playing at the edges of her lips. "You say that now, but we both know that the universe isn't so simple. I may not be locked in a cage, Drace, but that doesn't make me free." Drace opened his mouth to protest, to tell her that she was free to leave any time she wanted, but the words caught in his throat. Because deep down he knew she was right. She wasn't truly free. Not while she was tied to him by a contract he couldn't break, not while they were bound by the invisible chains of necessity. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. "I'll find a way," he said, his voice steady now. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way to free you." Oriala's eyes searched his face for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of his words. Then, without warning, her expression softened just slightly, a shift so small that Drace almost missed it. "You don't understand, do you?" she said quietly, her voice no longer sharp but filled with something deeper. "Freedom isn't something you can give me, Drace. It's something I have to take." Drace frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Oriala stepped closer still, and Drace could feel the strange energy that seemed to radiate from her. She was close enough now that he could see the delicate patterns etched into her violet skin, the faint glow of her eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You're trapped by your own chains," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "Your debts, your responsibilities. They bind you just as tightly as any contract binds me. But together, perhaps we can find a way to break free." Drace blinked, taken aback by the intensity of her words. He hadn't expected this strange offer, this suggestion of partnership. It was as if she saw something in him, something he hadn't even acknowledged in himself. "You need me," Drace Oriala continued, her voice barely above a whisper now, but filled with a quiet power that sent a chill down his spine. "And I need you. If we're going to survive this, if we're going to be free, we have to do it together." Her words hung in the air between them, charged with a dangerous promise. Drace's heart raced, not from fear but from the weight of what she was offering. A bond, a partnership forged not from ownership but from necessity, from trust. He swallowed hard, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "Together, then." For the first time since they had met, Oriala smiled. It was a small, fleeting smile, but it was real. And in that moment, something shifted between them, a fragile truce, an understanding that went deeper than words. Drace turned to leave, but before he stepped out of the room, Oriala's soft voice stopped him. "Drace," she called, her voice gentle now, almost vulnerable. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at her. She stood in the center of the room, her violet skin glowing softly in the dim light, her eyes fixed on his. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for not locking the door." Drace felt something tighten in his chest, a small but powerful ache that he couldn't quite explain. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and left the room, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they were no longer master and slave. They were something else now. Something neither of them could yet define, but for the first time Drace felt that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Together. The silence on the silent ember had changed. It wasn't the stillness of tension anymore. It was something heavier, thick with unspoken possibilities. As the ship drifted through space, it carried with it the weight of two souls who were, whether they admitted it or not, bound together now by more than circumstance. Drace felt the shift, though he didn't quite understand it. Oriala's presence in his ship no longer felt like an intrusion, it felt like something else, something deeper and more dangerous. He could sense her, even when they weren't in the same room, as if the air itself vibrated with her energy. It made his skin prickle, made him more aware of himself in ways that unsettled him. He sat at the ship's console, staring at the empty expanse of space stretching before him. But his mind wasn't on their destination, it was on her. Everything about her, her violet skin that shimmered in the light, her eyes that seemed to peer into the very depths of him, lingered in his thoughts like an echo. But what unsettled him most wasn't her alien beauty or the mystery that surrounded her. It was the way she made him feel, how her presence seemed to tug at something buried deep within him, something he hadn't known was there until now. He had spent years alone on this ship, drifting from one deal to another, avoiding connections because they only led to betrayal or loss. Yet here was Oriala, tearing through his defenses without even trying. A soft sound broke the silence, her footsteps, light but deliberate. Drace turned to see Oriala standing in the doorway of the cockpit, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She moved with that same liquid grace, her presence filling the space effortlessly. He tensed, unsure of what she wanted, but knowing that whatever it was, it wouldn't be simple. "I see you're not avoiding me this time," she said, her voice smooth, but with a hint of challenge. Her gaze held his, steady, unflinching. Drace leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain a casual posture, but he knew she could see right through him. "I figured there's no point," he said, keeping his tone light. "We're stuck in this mess together, after all." Her lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, but there was no amusement in her eyes. She stepped into the cockpit, closer now, and Drace could feel the pull of her presence, like gravity shifting around him. It was as if the space between them was charged with something electric, something primal. "You've been thinking about what I said," Oriella continued, her voice low, intimate. It wasn't a question, she knew. "About us needing each other." Drace's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to push her away, but the truth was impossible to ignore. She was right. They were linked now, whether he liked it or not. He needed her, not just to settle this debt or survive whatever dangers lay ahead, but for something deeper. Something he wasn't ready to admit to himself. "You're right," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We do need each other. But that doesn't mean I know what the hell I'm doing." Oriella's smile grew slightly, a knowing glint in her eyes. "That's what makes this interesting, doesn't it? You don't know. You can't control it." She was closer now, so close he could see the fine details of her skin, the faint glow beneath the surface, the way her breath moved in slow, controlled rhythm. Drace swallowed, feeling a heat rising in his chest, something that wasn't just attraction but something deeper, something dangerous. "You're playing a dangerous game, Oriella," he said quietly, his voice tight with the tension coiling inside him. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze softening but still sharp. "Am I? Or are you afraid of the game because you can't control the rules?" Drace opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. She was right, damn her. He wasn't used to this feeling of being off balance, of not being in control. He had spent his whole life keeping people at arm's length, protecting himself from the inevitable betrayal that came with trust. But Oriella, she was different. She wasn't someone he could push away so easily. Oriella moved closer, her body just inches from his, and Drace could feel the heat radiating from her. Her eyes never left his, and in that moment it felt as if the universe had shrunk to just the two of them, the space between them humming with unspoken possibilities. "You can feel it, can't you?" she whispered, her voice soft but filled with a strange power. "The bond between us. It's already there, even if you're too afraid to acknowledge it." Drace's heart raced, his breath shallow. He wanted to deny it, to push her away, but the pull was too strong. It was as if something inside him was reaching for her, something primal and raw, something that had been buried for too long. He couldn't fight it anymore. Before he could think, before he could stop himself, Drace reached out and caught her wrist. The touch was electric, a jolt of heat that shot through him, making his pulse race. Oriella didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped even closer, her body now flush against his, her eyes locked onto his with a hunger that mirrored his own. The air between them was thick, charged with something that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Drace's mind screamed at him to stop, to pull back, but his body refused to listen. He had spent too long running, too long denying what he wanted, what he needed. Oriella's hand came up, lightly grazing his jaw, her fingers cool against the heat of his skin. Her touch was gentle, but it carried the weight of something much deeper, something ancient, something powerful. "I won't break you," Drace, she whispered, her lips hovering just inches from his. "But I will change you." The words sent a shiver down his spine, not from fear, but from the raw truth of them. She would change him, she already had. And the terrifying thing was, he wasn't sure he wanted to resist anymore. Without thinking, without hesitation, Drace closed the distance between them, his lips crashing against hers with a force that felt like a release of all the tension that had been building between them since the moment they met. Her mouth was soft, warm, but the kiss was anything but gentle. It was fierce, hungry, a collision of need and desire that had been simmering beneath the surface for too long. Oriella responded in kind, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed closer to him, her body fitting perfectly against his. The heat between them flared, and Drace felt himself losing control, surrendering to the storm that was Oriella. It was reckless, dangerous, but he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of losing control. Their kiss deepened, and Drace felt her hand slide down his chest, her touch leaving a trail of heat in its wake. His pulse thundered in his ears. and he knew that this moment, this connection wasn't just physical. It was something more, something deeper that neither of them could fully understand yet, but they both felt it. Suddenly, Oriella pulled back, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts, her eyes glowing brighter now, like amethyst flames. Drace could feel the energy crackling between them, the bond she had spoken of now undeniable, tangible. He could feel her emotions swirling in the air around them, desire, fear, defiance all mingled with his own. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that gave him pause. Vulnerability. As strong as she was, as fierce as she had been, there was a fragility there, a crack in the armor she wore so well. "I won't let this be a cage," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with meaning. Drace's heart clenched at her words. He understood. This wasn't just about desire or lust. This was about freedom, her freedom, his freedom, and the fine line between them. "I won't let it be," Drace said, his voice rough but steady. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. Together." Oriella searched his face for a long moment, her eyes softening as she seemed to find the truth in his words. She nodded, though the weight of her past still lingered in the air between them, a shadow that would take time to fade. As they stood there, the tension between them ebbing but not disappearing, Drace realized that they had crossed a line. There was no going back now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, bound not by ownership or obligation, but by something far stronger. Something that neither of them could break. The silent ember hurtled through the vast stretch of space, but the calm outside did little to match the tension boiling within. The kiss between Drace and Oriella, an unexpected collision of desire and need, had shifted the fragile balance aboard the ship. Drace had promised they would face whatever came together, but the truth was, they were bound by forces far beyond lust or understanding. And something dark, something inevitable, was closing in on them. Drace could feel it, even as he sat in the cockpit, monitoring their course. The quiet wasn't soothing anymore, it was a prelude to something he couldn't name. His heart raced, and not because of the growing connection between him and Oriella. It was the nagging sense that they weren't as alone as the empty stars suggested. His thoughts kept drifting back to the weight of her lips on his, the press of her body against his. It wasn't just physical, though the spark between them was more primal than that, a bond neither could escape. He shook his head, trying to clear the haze. He needed to stay focused. There were too many unknowns at play, and giving in to desire now would cloud his judgment. The ship's systems hummed quietly, but suddenly, a sharp beeping pierced the air. Drace frowned and leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the controls. Something was wrong. A proximity alert. His blood ran cold. No one should have been able to track them this far out. He quickly activated the scanners, and his worst fear solidified. A ship, much larger than his, was tailing them. "Damn it," Drace muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the controls. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. His mind raced back to the auction, to the merchant's oily grin when he'd sealed the deal for Oriella. They had been set up. Of course they had. He leapt from his chair and rushed down the narrow hallway toward Oriella's quarters. She had to know what was coming. They didn't have much time. He reached the door and slapped the panel, the door sliding open with a hiss. Oriella stood in the middle of the room, her back to him, but Drace could sense the shift in the air. She already knew. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath it. She turned to face him, her violet eyes gleaming with a mixture of anger and something else, acceptance. Drace's jaw clenched. "I didn't want this to happen." "It was always going to happen," Oriella replied, stepping closer. "You think they'd let someone like me slip away so easily? I'm worth more than you know, Drace, and they won't stop until they get me back." Drace took a breath, his frustration mounting. "Then we fight. I'm not letting them take you." Oriella's eyes softened, but only slightly. "I appreciate your bravado, but you have no idea what you're up against. You think this is about me being a valuable asset? It's more than that. There are things about my people, about what I can do, that you don't understand." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to grip her arm gently. "Then help me understand. Tell me what I'm fighting for." For the first time, Oriella hesitated, her gaze flickering with something like doubt. Then she sighed, as if the weight of her next words was almost too much to bear. "I wasn't just sold as a slave, Drace. I'm a key. My people, those who want me back, believe that I have the ability to unlock something ancient, something powerful. Drace's brows furrowed. Unlock what? She shook her head. I don't know. It's a part of our lore, something they kept secret from most of us. All I know is that I'm tied to it, somehow. And that's why they're coming for me. Not because of what I am, but because of what I can unlock. The realization hit Drace like a blow. This wasn't just about reclaiming a runaway slave. This was about something much bigger, something that involved powers and mysteries far beyond his understanding. The thought of it made his skin crawl. Before he could say anything else, the ship rocked violently. They had been hit. Drace staggered, catching himself on the doorframe. Oriella remained still, her expression unchanged. They're here, she said softly. Drace's heart raced. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the cockpit. We need to get out of here. Hold on. The moment they reached the cockpit, the view outside confirmed his worst fears. The pursuing ship had fired warning shots, and now a transmission was coming through. Drace hesitated, then tapped the comms button. The screen flickered to life, revealing a face that sent a chill down his spine. A tall Lyrian man, his skin a paler shade of violet than Oriella's, stared back at them with cold, calculating eyes. He was flanked by armed guards, their expressions hard and unyielding. Drace Veron, the man said, his voice smooth and detached. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Drace's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. She doesn't belong to anyone. The Illyrian's lips curved into a thin smile, noble, but misguided. Oriella is not just a slave. She is the key to something far greater than you could comprehend. If you hand her over, I will allow you to live. Refuse, and I will take her by force and end your life in the process. Drace's mind raced, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He had no idea what this man was talking about, no idea what Oriella truly was, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't about to hand her over to these people, no matter what power they wielded. I won't hand her over, Drace said, his voice firm, unwavering. The Illyrian's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. Then you've chosen death. The transmission cut off, and within seconds the ship was rocked by another explosion. Drace cursed under his breath and grabbed the controls, desperately trying to steer them out of the line of fire. But the enemy ship was faster, more powerful. They wouldn't survive this for long. Oriella's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, and Drace turned to look at her. Her expression was calm, but her eyes gleamed with a fierce determination. Let me help, she said quietly. Drace frowned. What do you mean? Oriella stepped forward, her hand brushing lightly against his temple. The moment her skin touched his, a rush of energy surged through him, like fire racing through his veins. His mind swam with unfamiliar sensations, but beneath it all, he could feel Oriella, her thoughts, her emotions, her power. I can guide you, she whispered. I can link us. Together we'll be faster, stronger. Drace hesitated for a split second. He had no idea what this kind of bond entailed, no idea what it would do to him, to them. But there was no time for doubts. They were out of options. Do it, he said, his voice rough with urgency. The connection snapped into place instantly, a psychic link that jolted through Drace's mind with an intensity that took his breath away. He could feel Oriella now, her thoughts mingling with his, her instincts guiding his actions. It was overwhelming, but in a way that made him sharper, more attuned to everything around him. With her in his mind, Drace's hands flew over the controls with newfound precision. He dodged the next barrage of fire with ease, weaving the ship through the enemy's attacks in ways that should have been impossible. His senses were heightened, his reflexes faster, every movement guided by Oriella's presence in his thoughts. But the enemy wasn't giving up. The larger ship closed in on them, its weapons charging for a final, devastating strike. Drace could feel Oriella's fear, her desperation, but also her unwavering resolve. We have to end this, she said in his mind, her voice steady but strained. We can't outrun them. Drace's grip tightened on the controls. Then we fight. Oriella's power surged through him again, sharper this time, as if she had been holding back until now. He could feel her strength, her connection to something ancient and raw. She wasn't just guiding him, she was changing him, merging their minds in a way that made them one. With a final burst of speed, Drace brought the silent ember around, turning to face the enemy head-on. His hands moved with a precision he had never known before, his body reacting to Oriala's thoughts, as if they were his own. The enemy ship fired, but Drace was ready. In a split-second decision, he maneuvered the silent ember with perfect timing, dodging the blast and unleashing a barrage of his own. The shot struck the enemy vessel dead center, and within moments, it erupted in a violent explosion, debris scattering across the void of space. The battle was over. Drace slumped back in his chair, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the aftershock of the bond. Oriala withdrew from his mind slowly, the connection fading until he was alone in his thoughts again. He turned to her breathless, his heart still pounding in his chest. What the hell was that? Oriala's eyes were distant, her expression unreadable. That was just the beginning, she whispered. The silent ember sat in the eerie stillness of space, the wreckage of the enemy ship fading into the void, but the battle was far from over. Inside the cockpit, Drace felt the weight of the silence press down on him. His hands gripped the controls, though his mind was far from the ship's systems. His thoughts were tangled in the aftermath of the psychic bond he had shared with Oriala, a connection that had shaken him to his core. It was like nothing he had ever experienced in intimacy that blurred the lines between their minds, their emotions, their very souls. But now that connection hung heavy between them, unspoken but palpable, as if the ship's air itself buzzed with the remnants of their shared power. He glanced at Oriala. She stood beside him, her violet skin dim under the soft cockpit lights, her eyes distant and guarded. She had fought with him, stood beside him in battle, but there was something more looming behind those glowing amethyst eyes, something she had yet to reveal. And then she spoke, her voice breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. "This is only the beginning," she said, her tone calm but laced with the gravity of what was to come. Drace turned to face her, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? We won, didn't we?" Her gaze met his, and in that moment he knew it wasn't over. Her eyes held more than just the aftermath of battle, they held a truth she had been keeping from him, a burden she hadn't yet shared. "They won't stop," Oriala continued, stepping closer. "This was just the first wave. They'll keep coming, not just for me but for what I can do." Drace frowned, his jaw tightening. What you can do, he had felt the extent of her power during their bond, the raw energy she had unleashed to help him in the fight. But there was more to this, he could feel it in the way she held herself, the way her words came out so carefully measured. Oriala hesitated, and for a brief moment the mask she wore slipped. "There's something I haven't told you," she said quietly. "Something about why they want me so badly." Drace's heart thudded in his chest, a cold dread settling over him. "What is it?" Her gaze didn't waver, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I'm not just some runaway slave, Drace. I was born with a gift. My people believe I can unlock something. Something ancient, something that was never meant to be disturbed." Drace's blood ran cold. "Unlock what?" Oriala's voice dropped, her words barely a whisper. "An ancient weapon, a power capable of wiping out entire worlds." The silence that followed was suffocating. Drace stared at her, stunned, his mind racing to comprehend the magnitude of what she had just revealed. This wasn't just about her freedom. This wasn't just about escaping her pursuers. It was about something far more dangerous. "You're telling me they want you to unleash a weapon?" Drace asked, his voice low, filled with disbelief. Oriala nodded, her expression grim. "Yes, and if they find me, that's exactly what they'll force me to do." Drace's heart pounded in his chest, the gravity of their situation sinking in. He had thought they were fighting to escape, to survive, but this was something far more catastrophic. If what she said was true, if she really had the power to unlock such a weapon, then their fight wasn't just for her freedom, it was for the fate of countless worlds. "So what do we do?" Drace asked, his voice tight. "We can't just keep running." Oriala looked away for a moment, her face tense, as if she were grappling with the decision she had been dreading. "There's one way to stop them. One way to end this." Drace's stomach clenched. "How?" Her eyes flicked back to his, the weight of her decision clear in her gaze. "The weapon can only be activated by me, but I can destroy it." Drace's mind spun. Destroy it? He could see the conflict in her eyes, the weight of what she was saying. It wasn't just the weapon she was talking about. It was her power, her connection to this ancient force. And if you destroy it, he said slowly, what happens to you? Oriala's voice was steady, but her words carried an undeniable sorrow. If I destroy the weapon, I lose my powers. All of them. The bond we shared, the abilities that make me Illyrian, they'll be gone. I'll be normal. The word normal hung in the air between them, and Drace felt the full impact of her confession. For Oriala, her powers had been a curse, something that had marked her as different, something that had made her valuable to those who sought to control her. But they were also a part of her identity. To destroy the weapon would mean destroying that part of herself. You'd lose everything, Drace murmured, the reality of her sacrifice hitting him hard. Oriala nodded, her expression tight. Yes, but if I don't do this, they'll never stop hunting me. And if they capture me, they'll use me to unlock a weapon that could destroy worlds. Drace's breath caught in his throat. It was an impossible choice: sacrifice her powers, her very identity, to stop this threat, or risk being hunted for the rest of her life, knowing the devastation that awaited if she was captured. And in that moment, Drace realized that this decision wasn't just about her. It was about them. The bond they had forged, the connection they had shared. If she lost her powers, would that bond break? Would she still be the same Oriala? He reached out, his hand brushing lightly against her arm, grounding her. It's your choice, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm swirling inside him. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Oriala's gaze softened, her expression conflicted. You don't understand, Drace. This isn't just about me losing my powers. If I destroy the weapon, it changes everything for both of us. I don't care, Drace said, his voice firmer now. Powers or no powers, we're in this together. You've never been just your abilities, Oriala. You're more than that. For the first time since they had started this journey, Oriala's expression broke, her hardened exterior cracking just enough to reveal the vulnerability beneath. She nodded, a silent acceptance of the burden she carried, and then turned her gaze back to the controls. The weapon is hidden on a forgotten planet, she said, a place buried deep in the nebula of shattered suns. I can feel its pull. That's where we need to go. Drace tightened his grip on the controls and set their course. The journey through the nebula was treacherous. The ship was buffeted by swirling clouds of energy and debris, the remnants of long-dead stars. But Oriala guided him, her connection to the weapon growing stronger with every passing moment, like a beacon pulling them toward the inevitable. When they finally emerged from the nebula, the planet came into view, a dark, desolate world, shrouded in shadows and forgotten by time. It felt wrong, oppressive, as if the very air was thick with the weight of ancient secrets and untold power. They landed in silence. As Drace stepped onto the barren ground, a chill ran down his spine. The temple lay ahead of them, half buried in the rock, its stone walls covered in unfamiliar symbols. At the center of the temple, a single pedestal stood, and atop it, a small, glowing orb pulsed faintly with energy, the very core of the ancient weapon. Oriala's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she approached the pedestal. Drace could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of what she was about to lose. She reached out, her hand hovering above the orb. For a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deep, shuddering exhale, she closed her hand around the orb and crushed it. A blinding flash of light exploded from the pedestal, a wave of energy that rippled across the temple and beyond, shattering the quiet stillness of the forgotten planet. Drace shielded his eyes, the force of the energy throwing him back. When the light finally faded, the orb was gone. The power of the weapon had been extinguished. And Oriala stood there, alone, her body trembling, her violet skin dimmed, her eyes no longer glowing with the power she had once wielded. Drace scrambled to his feet and rushed to her side. Oriala, are you? She turned to face him, her expression calm, though her eyes held a deep, unspoken sadness. It's done, she said softly. The weapon is gone. And so is my power. Drace felt a surge of emotion, relief, sorrow, and something more. He reached for her, taking her hands in his. You did it. You stopped them. Oriala nodded, but there was no triumph in her eyes, only the quiet resignation of someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice. She had lost a part of herself, but she had gained something far greater: freedom. Freedom from the pursuit, from the fear of being used as a weapon. We're free, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Drace squeezed her hands, his chest tight with the weight of everything they had been through. Yes, he said softly. Together. The stars above them glittered in the sky, cold and distant, but for the first time, Drace and Oriella stood beneath them, as equals no longer bound by the chains of fate, no longer defined by the powers they had lost. They were free to chart their own course, whatever came next. And as they turned away from the temple, walking side by side across the desolate landscape, Drace knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. But for now they had each other. And that was enough.